of extractors, particularly at a local level, tenderpreneurs, extortionists, and mafias. There are many lessons from our past. Now's the time for those that are progressive, politically and socially active in the non-governmental field to come together to ensure that we build consensus around a common platform of progressive politics, not focus on ourselves, but rather on what we can do for the majority of our people, and improve the standard of living of South Africans expeditiously and ethically. Let us open a new chapter on united progressive mass mobilization and campaigning which builds national unity, social cohesion, and a new optimism and determination to build a better South Africa. Thank you for the opportunity to make this contribution to the celebration of the 130th anniversary today.
You can get a sense it's almost like marching orders to the streets, to the streets, to the streets. There's a vehicle BR00GLGP, it's an Audi. If you could just move it, you seem to be blocking either the driveway or somebody else. Now somebody who could probably speak for hours here about his relationships with PG is Mac Maharaj, but Mac has agreed that he'll limit it to probably just a day-long input. But Mac has probably in this room the longest relationship with PG, and it's an honor and a privilege to ask Mac to come and share his tribute. But let me also acknowledge, whilst Mac is coming up, the presence of the ANC Veterans League here today, Snuki Zikalala, Mabuso Msimang, Faisal Randera, amongst others. Your presence is just hugely appreciated. Thank you very much. Comrade Mac.
Thank you, Comrade Chairman. Colleagues, today I'm filled with deep sadness. A sadness that Pravin should pass away so soon after he retired, in the hope that he will have more time to spend with his family. My thoughts go out to his wife, and I would stress his comrade in arms, Vanita, his daughters Anisha and Priyasha, and all his extended family. I'm also seized with a profound sense of gratitude that I was able to share the freedom struggle trenches with Pravin, for he was an indomitable freedom fighter. Nothing that the enemy could marshal against him deterred him. He strengthened and he gave me knowledge that our struggle, even in this democratic era, is always about the people. For they, the people, are the makers of history, and ours is a duty to be their servant. Pravin was their servant of the struggle against apartheid and in the making of our democracy to deliver a better and a caring society. Pravin was their servant. He cared, he served, and he walked the path strewn with thorns, but he never faltered. He endured, he triumphed. So let us treasure the memory of this great servant of the people. Thank you.
Thanks, Comrade Mac. Followed by somebody who went through the ordeals of working in Treasury with PG, and perhaps he'll reflect on that now. Kabisa Jonas.
Thank you very much, and I'm just thinking that I'll try very hard to emulate Comrade Mac about being short enough. Let me thank everybody for gathering here today and joining us in this sad moment. What makes it even sadder is the fact that a couple of weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, if I'm correct, we all gathered to celebrate PG's exit out of public service. A lot of comrades and activists joined us in that endeavor, and a lot of people spoke about PG. And I was making a comment to somebody to say that actually, as I was looking at PG right through these comments and praises, I was getting a feeling that he was shrugging them off. And my comment was that probably he was shrugging them off because PG is the penultimate freedom fighter. He probably was gearing himself for another battle. And I was actually thinking that if he has another battle, I hope he doesn't throw me in. But little did we all know that the next battle would be a battle against a very vicious disease, cancer, that took his life. So it is really a sad moment that we watch him waste away within a very short space of time, but still experience the wisdom, the clarity and lucidity of thought that PG always had, and he enriched us even in his last days about what to do with South Africa. I'll say 3 things and shut up about PG. The first, I think, is probably what many people have spoken about, how PG was a revolutionary by excellence. Because sometimes we have these terms that we throw at each other, comrades, revolutionaries, etc. Sometimes they don't have meaning. Sometimes they're just words we use to distinguish ourselves from the rest. PG's revolutionary credentials stem from an absolute, complete commitment to the people, to the South African people. I met him many times and I've spoken to him many times. One thing that strikes you in dealing with PG, life was about advancing the lot of the South African people. It was about how to take South Africa out of poverty, how to take it in a different trajectory, and how to deepen the work that the African National Congress in general, but also government specifically, was doing to improve the lot of our people. Now, when we say that, he also, in the course of that, collided with many of his comrades. If I can tell you one thing, the most difficult thing for any activist, it is when you stand against your comrades. It is when you have to confront the ills and wrongs that your own comrades are doing. And many of us falter in that task, because many of us look away and not confront the challenge of correcting the wrongs of our own. And PG taught us one thing, that at moments when principle matters, we have to stand. You have to stand against your very own. And many people really, I can tell you, fail in that test. They will always look on the other side or accept what is not supposed to be accepted, simply because it is their comrade. Up until his death, PG was so focused on trying to deal with issues of corruption, to deal with issues of misdirection of the African National Congress and the country. He was still focused on ensuring that the country is brought back to the central path of dealing with all the political, social, and economic morals that the country was going through. My last point is, PG was a mobilizer, a strong mobilizer, basically. Mobilization sometimes is easy to talk about, because if you think about it, your first stance as a member of the ANC would be you're mobilizing the branch. There was a time when things were difficult in this country, there was a time that it was very clear and visible to anyone that the credibility and integrity of the ANC was completely undermined. We had rigorous discussions at that point, and many of the comrades who were part of these discussions are sitting here, Momo and many of them, one colleague, were part of that conversation. What do you do? And we took a very hard decision at that time, again led by PG, to say, let's mobilize society. And the question was, how do you mobilize society? And what constitutes society? I tell you now, within no time, PG was in the forefront, going out of ANC structures, going out of the normal alliance structures, to mobilize society against state capture, to mobilize society on a new agenda for strengthening and deepening democracy in this country. I can tell you now, with no fear of contradiction, that if PG didn't do that, the Guptas would still be in power. Oh, sorry, Jayzat would be still in power. But that's the kind of commitment that he had. He understood that the ANC is an agent for change. It is an agent for change. It is not an end in itself. The minute you look at the liberation vehicles as an end in itself, you must also know that your revolutionary credentials have come to an end. It is an important agent because if correctly organized, correctly focused, it could be the center point for remobilizing us around democracy, strengthening democracy, around non-racialism, around all of those things we believe in. But it is an agent. Agents fail sometimes, and agents succeed sometimes. But the principles don't fail. The principles are consistent, that our support to our organization must be based on principle, not based on the fact that this is our historic home, our forefathers and mothers belong to this, we grew up in this. We should be guided by principles. We should be guided by a belief for a better future for South Africans. And if our organizations don't do that as agents for change, we've got to do something to strengthen them, but we also have to do something to protect society from our own ills and our own cruelty. I end by saying that to the family of PG, and I know that if somebody says, I'm the daughter of Pravin Gordhan, I'm wife of Pravin Gordhan, people think, oh, that it must be nice for you. The reality is that most of the families of our leaders go through the most difficult time. Cruelty that is supposed to be directed at our leaders gets directed to their families. I always maintain that liberation movements generally have a humane agenda. But sometimes in executing that agenda, they are the most inhumane towards each other, the individuals towards each other. PG suffered. He suffered personally. We witnessed it. His family suffered. He was demonized by many, demonized to a point where even racial slurs were thrown at him. There was a time when others even thought it wise to attack him because they happened to think he is Indian. And if you talk to PG, those who know him, he was deeply non-racial. The Indian question in his mind was probably secondary, if not third issue. His first and foremost focus in life was that he is a human being dipped in a struggle to free the human beings from oppression and exploitation. And I think that if there's any gift we can give to PG, it is to reignite a strong South African spirit that fights against ethnicism, that fights against racism, that builds a society based on democracy and an egalitarian society. I thank you.
Thanks, Kabisi. Next up is Derek Hanekom, who says that he shares the distinction of having been fired together with PG at the same time, and he's going to talk about what that felt like.
That's a Trump would fire.
Without a telephone call.
Without the telephone call. Okay, smoke signals or whatever.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you all for being here. So, biggest claim to fame is that I was fired with Pravin Gordhan. I don't really need to say much more than that. So, let me start off firstly by acknowledging the presence of the leadership of the Veterans League. And I say that not because, I personally hold them in high regard and have a deep respect for the elected leaders of the Veterans League, but because Pravin put so much hope in the matters that the Veterans League were now taking up so vigorously in the attempt to renew the ANC and to restore the credibility of the ANC and the rightful role of the ANC. So, veterans, dear veterans, we really appreciate your work, but we say to you, keep it up with even more vigor in honor of Pravin Gordhan. So we have all of these, it's difficult to speak after the previous speakers because in a way they've said it all. There's not much to add. But the cliche often used is, a gentle giant has fallen. Well, true, he was a giant, but not always that gentle. We're very clear about that. But on the other side, there was a gentle side and a compassionate side of Pravin Gordhan, which the public wasn't always aware of. A man that had intense loyalty to his comrades and his friends, and especially to his family. So here was the fighter, Pravin the fighter, the courageous, bold fighter, and Pravin, the loving man, loved his family like you wouldn't believe. And to be honest, the many things that Pravin has achieved during his life, he would not have been able to do, especially the latter years. The fights he took up that often were up against a terrible opposition, unprincipled opposition, and without the support of his family, he would not have been able to do it. So I think this amazing supportive family enabled Pravin to be a fighter until the very end. And a fighter not just for the sake of fighting, but a fighter for justice, a fighter for what is right. And if we are going to pay one little tribute to Pravin, the biggest tribute that we can pay is to carry on with that fight. And that is the thing that he would have wanted of us more than anything else. We can put roses on his grave and flowers on his grave, and we can do all of the things that might be done when a person passes away. But more than anything, he would have liked us to carry on with that struggle, because the struggle indeed was his life. He lived a life completely dedicated to the struggle for non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa. That was his life until the very end. So it's really an honor to speak here today, but also an honor to be with somebody like Mac Maharaj. Because Mac Maharaj is still with us, and we're grateful that he's still with us. And he is exactly the same. Mac Maharaj will struggle until the very end. So a tribute to you, Mac, while you're still alive and with us, and we expect you to be with us for a long time to come. You better be. He's committed himself publicly. But one thing you know of somebody like Mac, he will never give up. He will fight the fight until the bitter end. And I think that is the message to us, is keep up that fight. And do it wherever you are. We don't all have the kind of profile that a Pravin Gordhan had or Nelson Mandela had, but we have our own little corners. we have our wonderful opportunities and moments when we take up issues of justice. We take up issues affecting the poorest of our country, which are the issues that were so dear to Pravin Gordhan. For me personally, Pravin had a profound influence on my life. And it started in a very difficult struggle to deal, as the former Deputy Minister has said, to deal with a very, very difficult situation, but to find ways of dealing with it, not just speaking out, but dealing with it effectively. And to make sure that this evil that was encroaching our society and taking over the governance of our country, and the real threat that our country would collapse in the face of unbelievable corruption, in the face of state capture, and to find effective ways of ensuring that that does not happen. So Pravin was a man of many dimensions, many chapters to his life, and one can speak forever and forever. I don't have notes in front of me, so I have to just work on my inner clock and say my time of speaking has come to an end. But more appropriate than saying a giant has fallen is to say a humble servant of the people has fallen. And that's what Pravin was, a servant of the people, a servant for justice, doing and never seeking to be glorified, never seeking to be treated as a hero, and yet he was a remarkable hero. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Derek. I think people were waiting to hear some of the inside stories and some of the more juicier parts of what happened in those fights in the NEC but I'm sure you'll do that when your memoirs come out. Mandla and Comfe worked with Pravin as an advisor for a fairly long time in his different ministerial posts. Mandla and I went to CPG probably about a month or just immediately after the elections to start talking about his plans. But what we learned was that we could not compete with, I'm not sure if it was the French Open or Wimbledon, the semi-finals. And we just could not compete with it. He would talk to us, but his eyes were focused on the TV. And eventually we decided it was a hopeless cause and we just left quietly from there. I don't even know if he noticed that we left. We did see him in the hospital. And he simply said to us, chaps, continue with the fight, continue with connecting all of these dots. And then he went back to sleep. Mandla, you want to share some of your perspectives? But as you got a long note there, it's a thesis, but you're going to summarize, right?
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Comrade Shan. And also to speak in front of veterans of the ANC and leaders of our movement. Now, let me start by saying I come from Soweto. Pravin comes from Durban. I'm part of what Oliver Tambo called the young lions of that generation. So in that sense, Comrade Shan, other than the almost 10 years that I've been with Comrade Pravin, I have also been with him almost close to 40 years in different capacities as such. And as young people, Shan is there, himself, Resh is here, and a lot of young lions. And I'm probably speaking for even the office, Ntabi Singh is here. There's a lot of lessons that we actually got from Comrade Pravin. I think the angle that I want to bring is the humanity of Comrade Pravin, because revolutionaries sometimes are looked at as very clinical, very cold, without any sense of humanity. And what is that sense of humanity? There are a lot of words that are coming out of that. One of them is the issue of compassion. Another one is empathy, and a whole range of other ways of responding to the vulnerable and powerless people within society. So that was Pravin for us. But within this notion of humanity, and a lot of people have spoken about that, is activism. Now, Pravin never saw himself as a politician. He would actually respond very badly if you say he's a politician. He had this skeptical notion around politics, short-termism, etc., etc. So the issue of activism and being an activist to the last is what defined him, and the sense of service to the people. So that's one part of it. We learned a lot from him insofar as thinking strategically in our deliberations, and he had this clinical mind of getting through complex issues, and reveal the essence of what needs to be done. So in that sense, I think he actually groomed a lot of people. So he was a leader, a mentor, a builder, and everything. But him as an activist, another notion is organization. So Pravin was not, in my view, this grand theoretician. So there's a role for theoreticians and ideologues in the movement. But Pravin was organization, strategy, tactics, and all that. So that for me is very important. And he actually instilled that to a lot of us who were working with him. So organization is one thing. Now, the one thing that I think people don't know about Pravin is his commitment to the ANC and to the organization. And you would say, but inside the ANC, outside the ANC, you have all these attacks. But like typical old cadres will say, it's the ANC. I must follow what the ANC, in the context of also what he thought needed to be done. So the issue of collective was very important. He was a builder, a father, an inspirer, and those of you who have worked with him would know that some of the things that he would say is not just things that come from him, but he would have canvassed those ideas with a lot of people. So when he talks, you will hear your contribution in his articulation of things. So organization, collectivism is one thing. So I say he was a kind of a party man as such. But in that humanity of him, I think Derek raised that, is the stubbornness of character, is the boldness of vision, is the boldness or is the determination to see through whatever needed to be done in a very clinical way. So he wouldn't do any other thing. Now, these were the attributes of him. And the fact that he was able to stomach the attacks that were there, the resilience, etc., I think is a testament to his strength of character as a person. He would always say conviction is very important. Somewhere, if you talk about SOEs, I must say that this was, I think, in the very first place, a very poison Chinese. Because that's where the site of state capture was, and the fights. And he went through very well with it. And my sense of it is the SOEs now, they are green shoots in a number of areas. But what we learned, one lesson, is that nothing is impossible if your vision, your strategy, your implementation is there. Pravin would push things to the brink. You think that, no, we're not going to get this thing, but he will get it. And all of you will say, how did we come out of this thing? So that was for him. I think it's the chair of our foundation who says that there's one, no, what Priyasha was reading, he was preoccupied with what it means to be progressive today. What is the new form of progressiveness as such, so that becomes the basis on which you mobilize and organize people. So this issue of progressiveness is very important. For him, the issue of social justice was important, the issue of non-racialism, and also very importantly, gender parity, etc. So for me, that defines the humanity of Pravin Gordhan. But like the others have said, for him, family was the center of his life. It was a source of strength and support, particularly in challenging times. And unfortunately, the attacks also came to the family. Priyasha will tell you, we were at vets at some point. She became a student leader herself, fought back, defending, etc. So it was actually a very bad. But he remained committed to public service as such. So I think for the youth and the future generations, we should draw inspirations from Pravin's life. That firstly, leadership should be synonymous with a steadfast commitment to serving South Africans, and that's the issue of national interest. Serving them with their needs so that those needs come first. And this is what he's saying to the NIC. And for us, therefore, to achieve this, we must safeguard, we must defend and enhance the institutions of our republic. Because the issue for him was the institutions. Despite the challenges and setbacks, in my view, South Africa's future remains bright. What we need to do now, which is not there more than ever, is ethical, courageous, and bold leadership that he has shown. And I hope that we'll follow that type of leadership with the courage of convictions and all that. And therefore, we're going to be revolutionaries who are humane revolutionaries, not slaughters of our people, or people with a social distance and all. So, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak in this honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mandla. The reorganization, the revitalization of SARS took place when Trevor Menu was Minister of Finance. And Trevor will now share some perspectives with us. Over to you, Trevor.
Thank you very much, Shan. Good afternoon to all of you, Priyasha, and in their absence, your mom and Alicia. I don't want to talk about SARS. We can write a book about that. I thought I want to raise a few other issues just because it can be difficult. So one of the questions that arises is, and virtually everybody who spoke about this commitment that Pravin demonstrated every day of his life throughout his adult life. The question is, what was the origin of it? And I went back and looked, because we know that Gramsci was an important influence in Peter's life. Nobody held a conversation with him, so Mandla, he was a theoretician. But Gramsci says this: you must realize that I'm far from feeling beaten. It seems to me that a man ought to be deeply convinced that the source of his own moral force is in himself, his very energy and will, the iron coherence of ends and means that never falls into those vulgar, banal moods, pessimism and optimism. You asked Pravin about what drove him. Why was never pessimistic in the face of anything? You could go back to this as part of his origins. But right at the very end, I was privileged to visit him in the ward on Tuesday, And I went in with Mkubisi, and he looked at us and laughed and said, "Hey, Bruce, you are here. Thank you very much for coming." And then he said, with the greatest courage, "As you can see, the end is nigh." And so as he lived with courage of conviction, without regrets about the path that he'd chosen in life, right to the very end, Pravin was able to demonstrate the same determination, the same singleness of purpose in the way in which he addressed issues. Two little points, bookends. The first would be from late 70s, early 80s, when transformation had to happen in South Africa. You will find that the transition to mass mobilization had PG's DNA all over it. You know, there were struggles in the 50s and mass campaigns in the 50s, and then the struggle was badly mauled. There was a 76 uprising, but the idea that you should form people into organizations that represent their interests, starting with PG and them in Seacow Lake, and building out from that campaign to civics, is an important issue. So by the time the UDF was launched, the civic movement was fundamentally important in all of that, and the Durban Housing Action Committee was one of the flywheels that gave rise to mass participation in the struggle. The other issue, and I just want to amplify, so that's one bookend. You can track it through them. What happens after that into the UDF, into general uprising in the country. And then the other part I'd like to come to is the issue that PG's attacked about, and that is his tenure in the Ministry of Public Enterprises. I want to amplify the point that Mandla just made. Almost the sole objective of state capture was to liquidate all of our state-owned enterprises. I can draw a distinction between the privilege I had of being Minister of Finance when there was very little debt in our public enterprises and no transfers from the fiscus to any of them. But what happened during the period of state capture is that everything was stolen from the public enterprises. And so, by the time PG's assigned that department, the cupboards are bare. The debt is high. You look at the debt service costs for Transnet Eskom, the list is endless. He had to work with the hand he was dealt. And that context becomes quite important. And the point that Mandla raised about green shoots happens in an environment where you say, the destruction has happened, the task now is to rebuild. And I think it's fundamentally important that we recognize PG's role in that rebuilding, in that giving a new sense of purpose and place to our state-owned enterprises. What cannot be disputed by anybody is his lifelong commitment to his beliefs, the way he lived, his commitment to ensure that everything was done to build a cadre who could follow, and the success of every step of the way. Lastly, his very fine strategic sense was always there. There were initiatives that nobody would have considered. I should say here as well that the idea of a broad united front was given rise to on the balcony of the flat that he lived in Prince Edward Street above his father's sari shop. And from there he took it. The UDF became that idea found purpose in society. He could always take a long view on life and ensure that there was commitment to see it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Trevor. Our last speaker here, can I just check where is this roving mic. Sheila Sisulu. Sheila will just talk about her recollections and her perspectives on PG's life, his contribution. And we're happy today that you don't have to navigate the pathways of God Hill that you had to do the other night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. And let me first start by conveying my sincere condolences to Pravin's family, and say how in one of the meetings that we had, I think it was Save South Africa, when we were supposed to have accompanied him to court, and instead we had a mass meeting in some hall, church hall in Pretoria. And you know how it is that when people are gathered in that kind of place, then they treat a person like Pravin as a celebrity, and we all want to rush around him. And at some point I saw him stop and almost and stop people from crowding him, not because he was being unkind, but he actually wanted to get his wife, who was being crowded out and away from him. It was just a small gesture that probably people missed, and I'm glad at that point he introduced her to me, and I've always had it in my mind. The other recollection was that he spoke against and worked against everything that was wrong in our government and in our organization at the time. But he was never cruel, never unkind, but firm in his beliefs. So around the time when he was, before the big meeting, when he was clearly being isolated for attack, I called him and said, can we have coffee? And I emphasize coffee, not tea, We met at a cafe in a cafe in Pretoria, and we really were talking about this and that, and for me it was to say to him, there are many of us who are here physically and openly with you. At the end of our coffee, I asked for a picture, and he said to me, Comrade Sheila, you're not afraid? I said, no, I actually am very proud to be able to have this moment with you. And of course, all hell broke through. Yesterday, I was very happy that I had a moment, or the day before yesterday, a moment to talk about SARS. You can love it or hate it. As someone would say, SARS, being in SARS, or people relating to SARS, SARS could never do right. It was like, there's a saying in Sepedi, Mac, that says, it was like a royal cow. If you meet it in the wilderness and you drive it to the royal crown, you might get into trouble. Because why? Where was this cow? Were you trying to steal it? If you don't save it from whatever. Why didn't you save it? So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. So I was one of those who had still have a love-hate relationship with SARS. The work of Pravin in building up SARS into a formidable, highly respected entity. Even at the time, and when the hyenas were baying for his blood and wanting to get into, well, they did get into SARS. Pravin himself, that they tried to destroy him from every end, and because of who he was, they failed. And today, as we celebrate his life, we celebrate a formidable comrade, a man of integrity, a baobab that is able to withstand all kinds of weather and be an inspiration to all who come into contact with him. So I'm glad my comrades from the Veterans League are here. I know the working on making the organization get back to its glory days. It's not been easy, it's not easy, it will not be easy, but we owe it to people like Pravin. And we're thankful that Mac is with us as well to continue this hard work, because the organization and the country and the people of South Africa deserve an organization such as the ANC to get back to its glory days and serve the people of South Africa. Pravin, find peace. We are here. We are dedicating ourselves to continue your hard work for the people of South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Manshila. Before we open up for a round of questions, I thought, just let me read to you, some words of PG in this book, this unauthorized biography. In it, he's quoted as saying, "No one can ever be satisfied that one knows it all. My life has been about learning and growing and adapting through the learning. I'll have to retire at some stage from formal politics, and yet look for other ways within my ability and health of contributing. You can retire from a job, but you can't retire as an activist." It then goes on. He says he'd like to be remembered as just the activist who grew up on the streets of central Durban, who had the opportunity to contribute as a lifelong activist to building the changing South Africa but also to build the institutions of democracy as one small contribution among many, many others. And how does he think he'll be remembered? Well, that depends on how you write the book. He laughs and then becomes serious. Actually, I think it will vary depending on what happens to the rest of my life. For the last 18 months, I've taken a lot of knocks for doing what we had to do in respect of SAA, for example. From an anti-corruption figure, I suddenly became stupid. And I was horrified the last 3 days to read the vitriol that was being spewed out, particularly on X. It was just the most disgusting content. I'm, however, very happy that I think this morning and going forward on all of the mainstream media, there's been a very different appreciation of Pravin. Some critical, and perhaps rightfully so in specific areas, but not the kind of just negative commentary for the sake of negative commentary that came before his death. And I hope going forward that when we introspect his life, it will be done on the basis of fact, not on fiction that I think that you would have heard in some of the radio stations this morning. So, just to repeat, the funeral takes place in Durban on Thursday. It is an official funeral, will be followed by a private cremation. But the final details of that will probably come from the presidency over the next few days. The family have also asked for the media and the general public, for those who want to go and pay their respects, to do that after 3 today, and also when it is no longer possible, to really respect their time and all that they will be going through over the next few days. Lastly, across the length and breadth of South Africa, you don't need permission to celebrate PG's life. Do it in the ways that you think is most befitting and is within the ability of the organizations and the people there. Because I think his life weekend.
And what you might be aware of, things that perhaps as the public we may not be privy to. Is it your considered view that much has been done perhaps to reverse particularly the effects of state capture, or do you still get a sense that the tentacles of state capture remain? Given the fact that the Guptas have not been held accountable in any form or shape. The next question would relate to, and you just touched on it, unfortunately we won't avoid it that much. The statement issued by the economic freedom fighters now who are, of course, we know that they have always been, their views against Mr. Gordhan are well known, but they just issued a statement today where they are saying he was the embodiment of what they call greed, corruption, and exploitation. I think perhaps, Mr. Manuel, he succeeded you, and perhaps Mr. Maharaj, if you can have a bite there.
Okay, so let's just see if there's any other question, and then we will take responses to them. Thank you very much for those.
Thank you. Thanks, Nishan. My question is to Minister Manuel, former Minister Manuel. My name is Peter de Toy, I'm from News 24. Can you perhaps just elaborate a little bit how difficult it is to rescue state-owned enterprises given the situation that we find ourselves in? How deep do you think is the damage that has been done, and how difficult a task is it to try and recover them given the constraints that we have on the fiscus at the moment? Thank you.
All right. Let me take one more there, and then we'll just take the responses, and I'll come back here as a second round.
Good afternoon, Zilego Mhlaba from Newsroom Africa. To pressure, some of the speakers here have spoken about the support Mr. Gordhan had from his family, but also the strain the family took when he was under attack. Can you share some of the critical moments where the family took serious strain, and did the family at any point consider asking him to resign from public service, at the back of those? But also generally maybe to Mr. Manuel and Mr. Jonas as well, looking at where the country is right now and the fight Mr. Gordhan was fighting, in terms of trying to fight back against state capture. Are you happy with where things are currently? Was his fight worth it when you look at the current state?
Okay, thank you very much. If we can just get, we'll come back to this, to another round. Kabisi, a good number of questions to you, and then to Trevor, to Yusha, there's something very specific to you. In fact, you want to start? You want to do it from here?
Then it's better.
Yeah. All the mics are here.
It hides a lot of things.
Well, the question, firstly, I think we should probably understand the complexity of state capture in particular and corruption in general. It's a very complex process, and part of it centrally involved the disestablishment of the state, basically, and state institutions. And if you kind of follow a lot of what PG used to talk about, it used to be the importance of institutions. So if you think about it, in that period, most of the institutions, key institutions, from NPA, the Hawks, the police, etc., but also key institutions like SARS. There was a major attack to weaken them. Now, evidence shows that projects like state capture succeed if you weaken government and therefore create vacuum. Because once you have vacuum, then you can actually continue doing whatever you want to do. The second part, I think they succeed if you have an ability to externalize the proceeds of crime. So you don't, if you don't have a channel for externalizing proceeds of crime, a state capture project normally fails. You've got examples across the continent and in other parts of the world. The effectiveness of being able to externalize proceeds of crime is another element of that. The third element that I think sometimes we have not really dealt with very well is the fact that is what many people call ethnic stacking. That actually it succeeds because you build almost other beneficiaries away from the real perpetrators of crime, of the crime. So you would find that in state capture,
if you take ESCOM, you'll have the main takers, but you'll have a series of coal people involved in coal, small and whatever, still beneficiaries to the process, and therefore it covers the core of the process, so to speak. Now, why I'm saying this? I'm saying this because I think sometimes when we analyze the success or failure of how a government has dealt with state capture and corruption, we actually focus on the arrest of the particular individuals. That being said, I think there has been progress in some instances. I think some institutions have been rebuilt, particularly if you think about the NPAs, the Hawks, etc. There's been a lot of work to rebuild. Now that has happened in a context where there are fiscal constraints. So again, you still have other challenges about how you finance this, etc., which becomes a big problem and impediment in what you do. The second point is that because they are complex and they involve high-profile people, the worst thing you can do is to have somebody try it wrongly and win the case. Because the signal that you send to society, and we have a case, of course, right now in South Africa, where the progress not only has been slow, but also I think sometimes the packaging of the charges and whatever it is end up people walking away. And that's actually a dangerous thing in these kinds of cases. So what I'm saying, there is progress, but I think we could do better, and we should be doing better. Part of the reason why I think we're not doing better is the mobilization of society around state capture and corruption. Because if there's anything that happened after the Gupta period, it has been the demobilization of society, effectively. The whole kind of movement that was like actively looking at these things disappeared. There's also been the weakening of media in some instances, where actually an attack was like waged against media in the manner in which they kind of may expose some of these things, as it were. And then I'm saying that I think moving forward, if we're to strengthen the fight, we've got to think about means and way of remobilizing civil society, remobilizing citizens around these things against state capture and corruption. But also I think we must continue with the project of rebuilding the state, which is probably a more fundamental element of what we need to do. And I guess to summarize, a lot has been done, but a lot more could have been done, I would argue. But also must also appreciate another element of state capture. It was primarily a political project. The extent of political reform happening in political parties is important. Whether political parties have moved politically in how they look at state capture and understand this state capture is as important as arresting people. Because if you have the fundamental theory that guides political parties is fundamentally flawed, it therefore creates the theoretical basis or the moral justification of doing these things and continuing to do these things. We also have other problems around how empowerment happens in South Africa. State wealth creation in South Africa remains a project of the state. And I think it's important that as we think about restructuring, we think holistically about all of these things and all of these elements. I think it's not a short-term project, it is a long-term project. And in that long-term project, we've got to change politics also. Because I think if you have the politics as they are today, I can assure you that in many ways, many political parties' survival is anchored into these forms of extraction, as it were. You've got to change that. You've got to change that. The ethos of the political system should not be what many people will call primitive accumulation. It should be something else. It should be the ethos of political parties should be principles, not primitive accumulation, extraction from government, and for parties to survive. And if you look at the past elections, the amount of money spent by political parties, and I can dare say that if you do a proper audit of where it comes from, you would reach uncomfortable conclusions. I end there, sorry.
Sarah?
Thank you very much. That statement from the EFF, was it just a statement of irony? Because greed and corruption defines what the EFF leadership is about. The problem that they've had with Pravin Gordhan and everybody at SARS is that SARS has to go after tobacco smugglers. Now, don't ask me why EFF is so attached to tobacco smugglers and whether some of the leaders live in the yards of tobacco smugglers. Don't ask me any of that. But there's a fundamental problem with a party that will not disclose who funds it and to what extent, in spite of legislative requirements, or a party that wants to participate in taking decisions that impact on the lives of all people. They have major rallies that have all kinds of gadgetry, rising stages for the one who defines himself as a commander-in-chief, hasn't commanded anything, but he calls himself that. And the problem for them was always that they were up against SARS. Now, anybody who knew Pravin, anybody who met Pravin, would be able to confirm that his life, his lifestyle, and in fact, the references that Priyasha read to the speech at the NIC is completely against every aspect of greed, corruption, and vanity. I think history will judge that issue. On the question of SOEs and what it will cost to put together again, it's a very difficult question. You know, leave SOEs for a moment and just look at SARS, because at the beginning, when SARS was being built, you could go to people who were on the up in their careers and say, democracy is fundamentally important, leave what you're doing. Join us, because this project to build a democracy is dependent on an institution like SARS. SARS needs your skills and acumen. Join us, even if it's for a short period, join us. And that was in fact the magic that gave SARS the energy to be the revenue collector in the world. I referenced this morning the fact that in the early 2000s, there was a request from the IRS in the United States to SARS to assist them to build a better inland revenue service in the United States. The IRS has been the subject of movies and so on. But SARS became the paragon of what was possible anywhere, not just in the developing country. When state capture happened and certain people were put in, at the same time, those who had the skills and commitment to democracy left the organization. Not all of them, but many of them did. And so part of the project at SARS now is to attract skills again and rebuild its presence in society. The same thing happens in the state-owned enterprises. So you can look at the balance sheet, and the Transnet published results this week. You look at their debt service costs, you look at their debt pile, you look at some of the decisions that were taken along the way that don't inform a state-owned logistics company into the future. These are big issues that happen in the environment. And part of what happened, and this, you can go through the pages of the Zondo Commission. Somebody will appear as the chair of this state-owned enterprise today. Tomorrow there are other people there. So the norms of corporate governance were never brought into application in the state-owned enterprises. And part of what the boards have to do now is rebuild ab initio, except that they're not starting at ground zero, they're starting in a very deep hole of debt that has been accumulated. And that, I think, is going to be an ongoing challenge. You look, I've mentioned Transnet, you look at the state of our ports at the moment, you look at the impact not just on our exports and imports, but upstream from that, you look at the agricultural sector, or many sectors, you look at what is happening with Richards Bay coal terminal and the kilometers, tens of kilometers of trucks. Now you have to ask who's come to own those trucks and who would resist the idea that you should have an effective coal rail system that takes coal from Ermelo to Richards Bay. You've got to deal with all of those things. They're complex, they'll be embedded throughout society. It's going to be a big, big question today. The last question, Sean, is was it worth the struggle? The struggle's not linear, you know? It's not a few steps in one direction, because what has happened in the project, and this is in fact the state capture project, was to drive back the gains, because the gains would be measured in the lives of everyday people. That reference that Pravin made to improving on the quality of life. When you feed corruption, you take skills off, you take opportunities, you take food off the table of poor people. And so that struggle can never be in vain. It's a continuous struggle. What we hope is that the state will be able to protect the gains that are made and continue to advance, because now every time you've had a major pushback, like you had, and I'm going to call it what it is, the Zuma years, you've got to start and build it up again when the resources are not actually what they were when we started from 1994. That's a big challenge we have. And the project now, and these are the words that come through from everybody who's worked on these issues in the detail with Pravin Gordhan, is that you can't give up that fight. You can't give up that fight. There has to be an even deeper commitment to ensure that we can deliver the objective of a democracy that impacts on the lives of the people. Is a commitment that we can never relent on.
Thanks. Just before Priyasha comes, so white dot HF94WGGP. You're blocking somebody's gate. I'm not going to look at you as you walk out to sort this out, but please go and sort it out. Priyash?
Unlike the leaders on this panel, this is my first time doing this, so please bear with me while I attempt to answer the question. I think with respect to my dad, he was a very disciplined cadre of the movement, and I'm going to follow in his footsteps and not say anything out of turn, as upsetting as it was to hear what the EFF has released. With specific references to things that were difficult that we endured as a family, starting late 2015 and early 2016, I think getting 27 questions a few days before delivering a national budget speech would stick out as one of them. Reading in the newspaper that your innocent father might be led away in handcuffs, NPA charges that were filed, taken down, incessant attacks by a public prosecutor who lost every single one of those cases, and all that was achieved was wasting of taxpayer money. Going up against forces in your own party, like was said earlier, was all very distressing for him. But we didn't make any singular decision to stay, and I say we because my father consulted us as a family with before every decision he took. And it wasn't his sole decision to stay in the public arena. He was told and asked by many different people to stay, to fight, because the country needed him. And as a family, we were willing to make that sacrifice. My parents are both political activists and freedom fighters. And as difficult as those attacks were, knowing that my father is an incorruptible, honest man who has only ever served the public to the best of his ability, as difficult as those attacks were to endure, we endured them for the country. And my father does not give up. He's a soldier, he's a fighter, and at no point was there ever a decision to step away until he had felt that in the current role that he was in, he had made the contribution that he could, and he was looking for alternative ways to do that in different forms after his retirement.
I want to make a suggestion that those of the media who want to follow up with any of the individuals here, please do that. People are available to do one-on-one interviews with you, but I'd like to pull this thing to a close if possible. We have extended it by almost 30 minutes. Just to thank members of the media for being here, to thank many of the veterans, Prema, Kamla, and everybody else who's here. Just your presence means a lot. And we will see many of you in Durban on Thursday. And to the family, we will walk with you for as long as it's necessary. Thank you, everybody.